Okay, today I want to show you how to get started painting on your pet portrait. We have been talking about a Greenville artist named Glory De Laughlin, and she does a lot of paintings of dogs, and she mostly focuses on the silhouette of the dogs, which we learned the silhouette is basically the outside line, the shape of the dog or an animal. So you got to choose whatever pet you wanted, and we're going to get started with our painting. You have your design all sketched out. Remember, even if you have mess ups, it doesn't matter. We're going to paint right over it. Here's a very simplified one. You are going to choose your basic colors that you want to get started with, okay? You need to have a placemat to put underneath your painting so it doesn't get on the table. And you also need a paper towel. You need a water cup, which is the yogurt cup just filled up halfway. You need some different size brushes, some big, some little. The smaller ones are better for detail. The bigger ones are better for big spaces. So for instance, on this one, I'd probably use a big brush for both of these shapes. Whereas this one, I'm gonna need some smaller point brushes, more like this size, to get in these lines and little ears and little feet. So you put your placemat down, and for paint, we are going to need to get these Tupperware containers. They have been used many, many times for painting. We're using acrylic paint, and so what's awesome is when it dries, it can just peel off like plastic, so we can reuse them again and again. So you get a container and get the colors you need. Pick one or two basic colors that you see in your artwork. So in my painting, I know that I want my dog to be black. I want to fill him in. And then in the background, I am going to paint all green around him. And then I'm going to go back and do these branches over top, or the grass, or whatever you want to call them, in some brown. So in my paint palette here, I got black for my dog, I got some brown for the leaf part, green in my background, and a little white in case I want to add some smooth accents. A big thing that we're going to use today is a technique called wet on wet. This is something that we've talked about with watercolor before, but it also works with acrylic paint. When wet paint is on a paper and you put more wet paint on it, it blends really nicely on the paper. So you don't have to pre-mix a color if you don't want. So we're going to use a lot of that, just like Glory De Laughlin. Okay, so I'm going to get started. I have my water cup, have my brushes. I am going to start on my background. I want to go ahead and get that finished. So I'm going to grab a big brush, the biggest I can find, and I'm going to use my green. And I am going to go ahead and try to get as close as I can next to the dog without painting on there. Although if you get a little on your dog right now, it's not going to really matter, because like I'm just going to go around the edges like this, because why? I'm going to go back over it with black, so it's going to cover it and not really matter. And right now I'm just wanting to get the big space of my background finished. So if you notice on this big brush, it's very wide and flat. So if you put your brush down flat, it makes a really thick line. If you turn it on the side, it makes a skinnier line. But when you have a big brush like that, use it to your advantage. Do long, smooth brush strokes like this to get big spaces covered. So this really shouldn't take you that long to get your background filled in. If you want to, you could always come back and do a second coat over the green, because as you can see, I'm still seeing a little bit of my orange paper through it. It's just the type of paint. This one in particular is a little bit thinner. So, you know, black, for instance, you probably wouldn't see through it as well. This green works out well because I can still see my Sharpie lines, but I can paint over it too. So I'm gonna fill this in and get the top of my painting up here. And the placemat is awesome because you can go right to your edges and not get it on the table. Less cleanup is always good. If you get any big globs, you want to really smooth those out because it's going to take forever for that glob to dry. All right. So I got the basics covered in. I can still see my black lines showing through. Now, here's the cool part of wet on wet I want to show you. So remember, wet on wet is a painting technique where you paint wet paint on top of wet paint. So I'm going to put this brush in my water cup so it doesn't dry out. And then I'm gonna come over and I'm gonna get some brown out of my paint palette. And I am going to go ahead and paint these long stems. So I don't know if you can tell, but my brown is not super, super dark. You know why? Because it's blending with that green because it's still wet. So if you like that, that's awesome. It works to your advantage. If you don't like that, it means you need to let your paint dry a little bit longer to not blend together. So as you can see, this is just something that I can quickly do. I'm not worrying about being exact. If you're a super perfectionist person, totally fine. You're just gonna take a little bit longer to paint, so you just plan for that. You can always let this first coat dry and then go back and add more brown on top to make it darker. Okay, so you kind of get the idea of how I'm going to continue to fill this in. I'm going to stop and I'll show you the end result later, but I want to go ahead and switch over to painting my dog. And this corner over here is actually a little bit drier, so you're going to see the brown get a little bit darker. But okay, so I'm going to rinse my brush. And I asked you to get a paper towel because with acrylic paint, when you change colors, you want to rinse it in your water cup, and then it's always good to wipe it on a paper towel because see, I still had brown in my brush that I couldn't get with just the water cup. Okay, so now I'm good to change colors. So now I'm just going to grab my black and I'm going to come in here and I'm going to fill in the silhouette. Remember the outside shape or almost like a shadow of my dog. And because the black is darker than the green, I didn't have to worry so much about it showing through. And I accidentally just stabbed my brush in the brown, but it really doesn't matter because the black's a little bit darker and I don't mind if a little bit of brown mixes in. So here's where you could use a little bit of white, or you could even use brown. I want to show the difference between these legs. So I'm going to actually blend in some white right here on the edge of these legs to kind of show the difference in the space in between them. And if you get too much, like I got too much white right here, I'm just going to add a little bit more black over top and blend it back in. All right, so there you have a quick basic overview of how to get started. And on this painting, all I would really add is maybe clean up my edges with the even smaller black brush, or just go very slowly with this one. And then I would finish up on my brown, painting my branches. So that is a quick example of one of my Gloria de Laughlin paintings. I'll do another one in faster mode so you can see it, but hope this gives you some help. When you're done, you take your brushes to the bubble bath at the back, and also your water cup, and dump it out. Paper towels in the trash can, and then if you can, put your lid on your paint palette so we can save it for another day. All right, can't wait to see your artwork.